Hey, I'm Chris. I am the next gen and middle school pastor. I'm used to speaking to middle schoolers, so I hope I don't talk over your heads. Just kidding. I'm here today. We're going to continue our series in Proverbs. We're going to be talking about how to optimize your life. Now, Daniel spoke the first week about optimizing your choices. And then Casey last week about optimizing your relationships. Today, I'm going to talk about optimizing choices, but choices that are going to keep you from a moral failure. The passage we're going to be looking at is Proverbs 7, and it's often referred to as the seductive woman. So before I go any further, let me explain something to you real quick. This will be a PG sermon, so if you have really young kids and you don't want to have to explain words to them on the way home, then you may want to, in a minute, I'm going to have everybody stand up and greet each other, and you can sneak out, and no one will know, all right? And no one will judge, all right? No one will judge. But, or some of you just saw me on the stage, and you're like, that's not Mike, and you want to sneak out too. If you do, no one will judge. No one will judge. Just pretend you're holding a kid's hand, and no one will know. No one will know, because they'll just see you from shoulders up, and so it's good. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to have everybody go ahead and stand up, and I want you to turn to the people around you and tell them about the cool thing you did on the 4th of July, unless you blew off your fingers with fireworks, then don't tell them about that. All right. Well, the crowd reduction wasn't significant, so I guess that's good. That's good. So we are in Proverbs. Proverbs, in my mind, is one of the most difficult books to preach from. And the reason why is, as you read through Proverbs, when I read Proverbs, it's like Solomon can take an idea and distill it down into 2 lines, right? So then, how am I going to take that idea and expand it to half an hour, right? Like, it just makes me look like an idiot. And but Proverbs 7 is different because it's a story. It's kind of a longer form proverb. It's really interesting because most of the Proverbs are very like, do this, do this, do this, do this. And Proverbs 7 is this kind of warning to a son about watching out for this seductive woman. Now, some of you in the crowd I know are like, hey, men can be seductive too. And that's true. I don't know what that was. That wasn't seductive. I don't know what that was. And that's true, but this is Solomon writing to his son. If Solomon was writing to his daughter, then he might write to be warned about the seductive man, right? And this plays for both sexes the same. It's not like you're a guy, you have temptation, women don't have temptation. I know that's not true. And so we're going to read through, we're going to read through this passage, and we're just going to, then I'm just going to talk about it, and then we're going to be done, and it's all going to be over, and you'll go home. All right, so here we go. My son, keep my words and treasure up my commandments with you. Bind them on your, keep my commandments and live. Keep my teaching as the apple of your eye. Bind them on your fingers. Write them on the tablet of your heart. Say to wisdom, you are my sister, and call insight your intimate friend. To keep you from the forbidden woman, from the adulteress with her smooth words. For at the window of my house, I have looked out through my lattice, and I have seen among the simple, I have perceived among the youths, a young man lacking sense. Not an evil man, a young man lacking sense. Remember that. passing along the street near her corner, taking the road to her house, in the twilight, in the evening, at the time of night and darkness. And behold, the woman meets him, dressed as a prostitute, wily of heart. She is loud and wayward. Her feet do not stay at home. Now in the street, now in the market, and at every corner she lies in wait. She seizes him and kisses him, and with bold face she says to him, I had to offer sacrifices, and today I have paid my vows. So now I have come out to meet you, to seek you eagerly, and I have found you. I have spread my couch with coverings, colored linens from Egyptian linen. I have perfumed my bed with myrrh, aloes, and cinnamon. Come, let us take our fill of love till morning. Let us delight ourselves with love. For my husband is not at home. He has gone on a long journey. He took a bag of money with him. At full moon he will come home. With much seductive speech, she persuades him. With her smooth talk, she compels him. All at once, he follows her, as an ox goes to the slaughter, or as a stag is caught fast, till an arrow pierces its liver, as a bird rushes into a snare. He does not know that it will cost him his life. And now, O sons, listen to me. Be attentive to the words of my mouth. Let not your heart turn aside to her ways. Do not stray into her paths. For many a victim has she laid low, and all her slain are a mighty throng. Her house is the way to Sheol, going down to the chambers of death. I think this is a story that maybe we can relate to at different points in our life. We've all experienced maybe not that, maybe not a woman dressed as a prostitute grabbing us and kissing us, but we've experienced sexual temptation that we knew was not the right thing for us. What I think is really interesting about this passage, though, is we get all the way to verse 22 before he steps over the line. He doesn't do wrong until verse 22. That's when he goes with her and goes to bed with her. So all the stuff that happens before, we would say that's leading up to it, right? But it's not wrong. And see, the problem for most of us is that we like to draw lines and say, I want to stay on the side of right. Like, okay, here's the line of right and wrong. I want to stay on the side of right. Okay? Let me show you a picture real quick. This is a picture of 8-year-old Chris Boggess and his little sister Ann. Some of you know Ann. And then his little sister Beth. And I was the perfect kid. You can ask my parents. I was so good. I was the goodest boy ever. Look at that. I'm a Cub Scout. Cub Scout with my little wolf book. Look at that. I think that was one of the 3 times I showed up at Cub Scouts. My parents were really upset about that. Anyway, but I was a great big brother because I, in equal measure, protected my sisters and antagonized them to death. Those were my 2 jobs. If you had little sisters and you're a big brother, you know that is your job. Those 2 things, and really there's nothing else, all right? So we had a rule at our house. It was called permission, right? Permission. You couldn't go in the other person's room without permission, all right? Some of you know what I'm talking about. You had different names for it. We called it permission. So I was good. I didn't go in my sister's room without permission. So I would put my toes right up against the line on the carpet, different color carpet, and then I would grab the door frame and I would lean into the room as far as I could and just say, "What you doing? What's going on in here?" And they would start screaming immediately, "Get out of the room. You do not have permission." And I would say, "I'm not in the room. My toes are on this side of the line. I am not in the room." They would say, "You're breathing our air." I'm like, "Air is free. You don't have to have permission for air." And so then they, like good younger sisters, came and did what they needed to do, which was they start banging on my hands, on my knuckles, and grabbing a hold of me and trying to pull me down. And eventually, one of two things would happen. Either they would manage to pull me loose and I would fall into the room, or I would just, out of spite, just go ahead and stumble into the room and fall in. And then 2 sets of howls would go up. One coming from them saying, "Chris is in our room without permission." And then one coming from me saying, "They drug me in." Both of those were true statements. But I had set that up by hanging in the door. If I hadn't been hanging in the door, if I was just walking down the hall, nothing happens, right? They couldn't drag me in the room. But because of where I was still right. I wasn't wrong. I wasn't doing the wrong thing in the letter of the law, but I was putting myself in the position to have the wrong thing happen. Look at this first blank. We want to avoid the direction, not just the destination, right? So when we look at verse 22, realize that all the verses before that are what set this boy up to have this interaction with this woman. If he had not been walking down that street, nothing would have happened. If he had been walking down the street during the day when there were a lot of people around, nothing would have happened. He made choices that were not wrong under the letter of the law, but they set him up to make the wrong choice when it counted. And see, that's the problem for us. A lot of times we draw that line and we say that's the line of right and wrong. But the problem with that line is that line makes us then think, well, every now and then, if you know the line of right and wrong, you might step a little bit over it, right? And then you come back, but you didn't get caught. So maybe next time you go, I can go a little further and step back. I didn't get caught. And the problem with stepping over the line is, and not getting caught, is the only way you can figure out how far you can go is to get caught. Yeah. So you got to make sure that you're drawing a line in such a way. I've heard people say this, you draw a line at the wise place, and then when you step over the line into the unwise place, the right and wrong line's still way up there. You know what I mean? So you haven't actually hurt yourself. You haven't actually destroyed relationships. You haven't done other stuff. You've just stepped into the unwise area. I think it's interesting, a lot of times when we are engaging, we're in those first stages of what's going to be a moral failure. We describe those first stages as harmless, right? So, you say, well, I look at pornography from time to time, but it's harmless. It doesn't hurt anybody. By the way, you really need to know that it's somewhere, one of the statistics I read said up to 80% of women in pornographic videos and images is actually a slave. She doesn't have a choice. And every time you watch it, you're encouraging her captors to benefit more from her. So there is harm in that. So, and you say, we flirt at work, but it's harmless flirting. No, you're walking down the street where she lives. Harmless is not the word for those kind of things. And I know some of you are like, oh, Chris, you're being prudish, look, I'm just telling you. You start walking down the street, you're going to run into the woman dressed as a prostitute. That's where she lives. If you don't walk down that street, you don't run into her. Stay off the street. Worry about the direction, not the destination. And look at this, guard your downtime. Think about this, you're weak when you're alone. When you have downtime, when you don't have anything to do, that's when, I find for me, that's when I try to get in trouble. That's when I find temptation jumps up the most, right? Because I don't have anything else to fill my mind, so I begin to think about other things. And that might be at work, that might be at home, that might be in the neighborhood, whatever. But you've got to guard those times. Those are the times you're the weakest. And I think those are the times that we're the least aware of what we're doing. look at this. It's not about good or evil. It's about wisdom. When we talk about that line, we think about good and evil, like I said. It's about wisdom. So is it wise for me to lean out over and lean in? No. Is it good? Not necessarily evil. But the kid in the passage, it doesn't say he's an evil kid. It says he's a dumb kid. It says he's ignorant. He's making a stupid choice. And I know some of you are like, Chris, I'm not dumb. But sometimes we make dumb choices, right? And we make dumb choices when we're not thinking about them, when we're letting ourselves be led by other stuff. So look at this. We don't want to just fight against temptation. We want to run from them. We don't want to fight temptation. Because look, here's the thing. You fight something when you're toe-to-toe with it. You don't want to be near it. I like to watch, this is weird, but I like to watch fighting videos, sword fighting, martial arts. I like to watch these instructional videos. I would probably get completely demolished in any fight I was in. But I love watching these guys talk about the technicality of it. And there's this one guy who's like, he breaks down all these videos about like different kinds of self-defense and stuff. And I like him. And he was talking about knife fighting. And he's like, okay, I'm going to teach you the best knife fighting technique I know. And this guy's like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, like MMA, like really cool. And so he's got this guy with a knife, and he's like faces off with him, and the guy's got the knife, and he goes, right? He said the only way you're not going to get stabbed is if you run. If you stand toe-to-toe, you will get stabbed no matter what. You might end up taking the knife away, you might beat him, but you are going to get cut in the process. When you run away, you don't. So that's important for us to think about. We don't want to fight temptations. We want to run away from them. We want to build relationships that help us stand against those, that help us, that are going the opposite direction of the temptations. And Casey talked about it last week, right? He talked about good relationships, healthy relationships, but those are not just with other people like friends. Those are also in relationships with man-woman relationships. We want to have relationships where we're going the same direction and we're going away from temptation. All right? So I believe that everybody in this room is in one of three places. Either you are way over here, you're not dealing with any sexual temptation in your life, you're solid, you're living a life that is godly and true, and all three of you that are in this room, that are here, we're going to talk about that, what that means. Then some of you are right here. Actually, I guess it would kind of be four places. You have these sexual temptations, but you're fighting them, you're trying to run from them, you're dealing with them, but it's hard, and you know, day by day. And then over right here, there are some of you who you are after verse 22 in the situation. You have fallen to those sexual temptations. You are engaged right now in a relationship that you should not be in. And you know it. Just being honest, right? And then some of you are right here. That's already happened, and now you are trying to recover from it. So for all four of these groups, we're going to talk about something for you today. And so there's some things that all of you need to remember, though, and I think it applies to all four groups, and these are the things that under that always remember tab there. First, avoid counterfeits. Avoid counterfeits. So a lot of times, and even in those verses, she says, let's spend the night in love, right? And we talk about love under the sexual temptation, like and here's the thing, I'm not just talking about married people having sex with people outside of their marriage. I'm talking about some of you that are single people who are having sex with someone who you're not married to. Understand that, and some of you are going to hate this. That's okay. I don't care. if you're having sex and you're not married to the person you're having sex with, there is no love in that. You say, oh no, I love her, I love him. No, you don't. Love is not self-centered. Love always puts the other person first. If you are satisfying your sexual impulses on another person, then you are not putting them first. You are putting yourself first. You love them the same way I love tacos. I crave them, I want them, and when I have them, I eat them up, and I love having them. But tacos do not fulfill me. And I don't have a relationship with that taco. That taco doesn't build me up, and I don't build the taco up. It's for this long, and when I'm done with it, I move on to the next thing. The love that you're talking about is the same as a taco. So if you're in that relationship and you say, he loves me, you're a taco. You say, she loves me, you're a piece of cheesecake. She's fulfilling, he's fulfilling his craving, he doesn't love you. And you go, oh no, but they do. Look, here's the thing. Anytime you're in a relationship with someone where they can just walk away with no consequences whatsoever, they are not in love with you. They're not putting you first. They're satisfying a craving using you. They are counterfeiting love. It's not real love. Because real love is committed to the other person's best. Real love is lifting up the other person. Real love cares about it. Now, I'm not saying that can't become real love eventually, but I'll say this. I think it's harder for that relationship to become real love than a relationship that starts out with love and becomes a sexual relationship. Because look, if you do all the things that Casey talked about last week with a person where you are going the same direction, you're following God together, you want the best for the other person, that's the basis of a relationship that then later pays off in marriage as a sexual relationship. Because now, here's the thing, sex in marriage is all about the other person. Think about that. Sex in marriage, you are trying to satisfy yourself, but you're also satisfying that other person. It's about them. And it's a whole different paradigm, right? And if it's not in your marriage, then understand you've messed up that idea of sex and love too. Counterfeits. Avoid them. Look at this next one. When I think I have it beat, I'm beaten. When I think I have it beat, I'm beaten. If you're here and you have no temptation in your life and you're not thinking about how you're going to deal with sexual temptation, you're already beat. Because when it comes, you don't know how to fight it. When it comes, you're not going to know where to run. Right? So when you think you have it beat, and even if you're here, like you're recovering from it, you're moving back, you're rebuilding a relationship that's been destroyed by sexual temptation, and you think, oh good, I'm past it, then you're beaten. You're going to go right back. If you think you have it beat, you're beaten. You're celebrating and the war is still raging. We live in a culture that's so over-sexualized that there is no way that you got it beat. You may have it beat until you walk down the checkout aisle at Kroger, see a magazine, and then it's right back. Right? You might have it beat until you're flipping through Instagram and you see somebody's picture and you're like, ooh, and it's right back. When you have it beat, you think you have it beat, you're beaten. This last one, this is a big one. You need to realize, especially if you're in this one, you already know this. If you're in the fourth one, you know this. But if you're in the first three, you need to realize this. The end is going to be sudden, shocking, and never worth the fun. Sudden, shocking, and never worth the fun. Look at this. I do like to watch TV. I like to watch things on Netflix, watch them in my own time and stuff. And I've been watching, I finished it yesterday, I've been watching Chernobyl. Anybody watch that? Anybody want to admit they have HBO? Some of you are like, I don't have HBO, I'm in church, right? Okay, but if you haven't watched it and you don't know what it is, Chernobyl was an accident at a nuclear facility in Russia in like 86. And what happened was it was a terrifying thing. I mean, when you watch the show, holy cow, I had no idea. Because the Russians at the time said, oh, only 31 people were killed. It was over 3,000. It's amazing what they did, how they lied and covered up. And as the show goes on, you realize that there's this pattern of lies that keeps undermining everything they're trying to accomplish. Like they're so busy trying to make themselves look good, trying to make the Soviet Republic look good, that they're shooting themselves in the foot. They're not getting the proper equipment because they're saying it's not as bad as they know it is. And so it's this whole thing. I'll tell you, I watched it slow because I kept thinking, oh, this is kind of cool, this is kind of cool. The last episode, if I had known how good the last episode would be, I would have binged it because the last episode was phenomenal. But there's a scene, they're having a trial for the guys who are responsible for this explosion. And the deal is, they made all these choices, but they made these choices with the idea that there was a button that they could push that would push the fuel rods, push these boron rods in and dampen the fuel rods and stop the nuclear reaction. So they knew they had this fail-safe they could hit and stop everything. The problem was that the government knew that those rods were tipped with graphite, which speeds up the reaction. So when the reaction is at a certain level, when you push those in, it doesn't stop the reaction, it actually causes explosions within the casings of the fuel rods, and everything blows up. When you hit that button, it's like pushing the button and detonating a nuclear bomb. They didn't know that. The government knew it because they had reports, but they had blacked out the reports. They had redacted them because it made the Russian government, the Soviet government, look incompetent. And the reason they had done that with the fuel rods in the first place is because it was cheaper. And they didn't want to look like they were doing it cheap. It made them look bad. So they redacted it. So there's, in the trial, this scientist is explaining what happened, well, explaining all that I just said and more. And then he says, but they couldn't have made the right choice because they didn't have enough information. And he says this, and when he said it, Heather's like, why do you keep rewinding? And I'm like, I've got to write this down. This is amazing, this line, listen to this. He says, every lie we tell incurs a debt to the truth. Sooner or later, that debt is paid. And then he says, that is how an RBMK reactor core explodes. Lies. And I'm telling you this, in your marriage, in your relationships, in these sexual temptations, they build up layers of lies that eventually will result in an explosion. And it will be sudden, shocking, and never worth the fun. It will be a nuclear bomb in your life. A few years ago, I went on this caving trip. And, well, actually, it was a rock climbing, rappelling, rafting, and caving trip. We went to West Virginia, my favorite place in the world, and we were there. And we did this thing where we went in this cave, and the cave only had one entrance, so it was fun for the kids because I could just say, hey, go, run, play, explore. Because any place in the cave where you were, if you felt like you were lost, you could just put your hand on the wall. If you follow that wall long enough, it's going to bring you back out. But there's one place in the cave, it's called the Devil's Blank Hole. There wasn't a blank, I'm just saying, I'm not going to say that. But anyway, and it was this tight little crawl, right? And there's a picture. See that? That is a big hole compared to the devil's hole. It's so tight that when you go in at the beginning, you have to put your hands in the position you want them in because you're not going to be able to rearrange. You have to turn your head the way you want it to turn because you're not going to be able to turn it once you're in it. You can't wear a helmet because the helmet will get caught. So the first time we went, I didn't go in because I'm like, yeah, there's some kids that don't want to go in, and I think I'm good out here, right? And it was a little scary to me. And I remember watching the people come out at the end of it and the panicked look on their face and the relief when they saw me there. But by the next year, I had forgotten that. And so when it came time to explore the cave, I went and everybody started going down, and so I went down with them. And going down, it wasn't too bad. It took about 5-7 minutes. I mean, it felt like longer than that, but it wasn't that long because the tunnel down to it is actually slanted. So gravity was helping me go down this cave, right? Then we get to the bottom, and there's this room. It's not really anything spectacular. It's just a little stone room, and it's got graffiti on the walls and stuff like that. And we look around for a minute, and the guide goes, okay, it's time to go back out. So we start climbing out. Now gravity's not my friend anymore. It's working against me. And I can only push with my fingertips and my heels. And my feet have to be turned this way. So I'm trying to push, and it's so hard. Sometimes I'm not even sure if I'm actually moving forward because I can't. It's so close to me. The walls are so close, and I've got the flashlight in my hand, so I can only see the shadows hitting the wall, so it's hard to tell distance. You know how that is? Like when something's really close and you can't tell how close it is. And so I'm pushing. Now, he had told us, our guide told us, stay to the right, because if you go to the left, there's a little side tunnel that you wouldn't have seen on the way down. But if you get in it, then you have to back out of it. And sure enough, I'm with kids. They didn't listen. And so they went. One of them went in the side tunnel. And so I can hear above me, back up. Because you can't hear anybody because it's all muffled because you're so tight. And so I had to back down because I feel these shoes hitting me in the head, pushing me down. And so I'm trying to push the person behind me, and they're like, what's going on? And I'm like, what's going on? And I'm like, oh, it's coming down. And they don't know what I'm saying. And so we're going. It takes at least a half an hour, maybe 45 minutes to get back up. It's so hard. And I remember that moment where I clear that last place, and I'm looking up, and all the flashlights are shining down on me, and I thought, oh, wow. And somebody said, so how was it, Chris? You gonna do it again? You wanna do it again? And I said, never will I do this again. I will never go into that hole again. Some of you are in that room at the bottom of that hole. You're there. You're in the experience. You've fallen to sexual temptation. The explosion hasn't happened, but it's gonna. And I want to tell you, you can get out of that. It's going to be hard. There's nothing easy about fixing that. But you can. And it's going to be a crawl, and there are going to be times where you think, oh, I'm never going to make it out. Some of you, you're in the position, you're not the one who fell to temptation. You're the one whose spouse, whose best friend, whose whatever fell to temptation. And you're in the hole too with them. And you're crawling out. And I want to tell you this. I believe, based on Solomon, based on Bible story after Bible story, that God can still use you, but you have to be willing to crawl back out of that hole. God has a purpose and a plan for your life. We talk about that with middle school all the time, but it's the same whether you're 12 or you're 72. God has a purpose and a plan for your life, and he wants to use you despite where you are on this spectrum. But he wants you to realize that that sexual temptation is the thing that can derail you, that can push you in the direction that you don't want to go. Ike Reichert, who started here, he said something one time that I always love. It's simplistic, but it's true. He says, sin always takes you farther than you want to go and keeps you longer than you want to stay. And that's true. But you don't have to stay where you are. Let me pray for you guys, and then we'll be done. Lord, thank you for each one that's here. And I pray for the ones that are in these different positions, whether they are not experiencing temptation, Lord, then I pray that you will protect them, but you will make them ready for when it happens. Lord, I pray for the ones that are dealing with it, Lord, that they will start walking the other way, running the other way, that they will avoid it at all costs. They won't try to stand toe-to-toe, but they'll run away from it. Lord, I pray for the ones that are in it right now, who haven't experienced the shock of it, who haven't experienced the heartbreak of it. Lord, I pray that you will begin to move them in the direction you want them to move. Lord, that they will begin climbing out of this before they ever hit the bottom. That they'll begin to unravel those lies so that the explosion never happens. Or at least it's not as bad as it could be. And Lord, I pray for the ones that are crawling out from those situations. Lord, I pray that you will give them courage. I pray that you will give them patience. I pray that you will give them all the things that you talk about that are the attributes of love: patience, kindness, long-suffering. That you will help them to lift the other people in their lives up and not focus on their own pain right now. Lord, thank you for all you're doing in and through us and all you're going to do in our lives. In Jesus' name, amen.